You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and the topic today is around e-commerce sales and share data as a whole. I just got a great friend and a supporter of the network, Todd Hassenfelt, and he agreed to jump on today. I was talking to him, a few months back, and we're just connected, and we're talking about share data and e-commerce sales, and it's just funny because he had this analogy as a whole that I want to kick this off with. And it's around, teams playing, Tinder with the sales data and the providers. And I just thought that was hilarious. But before we jump into that, Todd, you want to jump in, a brief intro on yourself? That'd be awesome. And then we can kind of dive into the topic at hand. Sound good?
Sounds great. Aaron, thank you for having me. And just first off, I want to thank the whole BWG community, what you and Bill and Fred all do in the different kind of segments. Just fantastic. And thank you for elevating industry, knowledge and sharing across everything you do. So thank you. I'm the e-commerce director of growth strategy and planning at Colgate-Palmolive. We are a caring, innovative growth company that is reimagining a healthier future for people, their pets, and our planet. So while you may know us for our toothpaste and oral care, we're also in the personal care, home care, and pet nutrition business. Some of our brands, besides Colgate and Palmolive, are Hills, like I mentioned, Irish Spring, Elta MD Skincare, and Hello Products. And Hello's founder, Craig Dubitsky, is a great LinkedIn follow. So if you're interested, check him out. But also, if you just want to learn more about us or see some things we're doing, go check out knowyouroq.com. It's an interesting site, and you'll learn a lot there. But excited to be here today, have this conversation with you. Just to level set, I've been lucky enough to be at a lot of different kinds of companies, from startups to big ones in between, sales and marketing, and part of a lot of share groups, and obviously the BWG community. So, my conversations here will be a collective experience from that, not necessarily just Colgate specifically.
Yeah, awesome. And completely understood. And that's where I think a lot of it, you and I have been chatting for years now, and a lot of it has always come up around, sales and share data and, share of digital shelf and what is it and how do you determine what it is? And we know there's all these different providers that have popped up, right? There's Profitero, the Stack Lines. Back when I was at Perigo, they had One Click Retail. It's now part of the Edge Group underneath Essential. And, it's just super interesting, that they're all out there and we're trying to figure out, we were having that conversation and you were talking about like over the years, right? Like, yeah, teams playing Tinder. Would love to hear with their data provider. Would love to hear if you want to walk through that a little bit.
Yeah, it's just, yes, over the course of years and having this with e-com sales and share data, there are so many out there and more have come out. And I think when you look at it, no option is perfect yet. All of them have a hole or more in their value props. So there's not one that you can say, oh, this is the perfect one that can address all of our e-com sales and share needs. They're perfectly accurate or as close to as we do in our brick and mortar. So because of that, with that, there's no one perfect option. A lot of us in the industry, we're trying to stitch this together, right? And you have to have more than one source. Now, how many that is, it depends on your business needs and what you're trying to do. But I think where the Tinder analogy comes in is it is that balance between, okay, how do we have enough options that we can pressure test each other, right? That say, all right, this option versus another, what's the difference? How close is it? Do we feel, how much more comfortable do we feel? But you don't want to get too many options that yourself or teams can say, well, I have, let's say, just make it extreme. I have 10 different options. And depending on the quarter, which one says what, I will go with the one that is the most green versus red, right? So you don't want to play Tinder with your data, but you want to have enough to pressure test it. And why is that? Well, you got to be, there's this, also balance of being consistent with your methodology. But don't be complacent, because, as you know, Aaron, everyone you're talking to, there's so much change going going on in this space of e-com sales and share. So, don't play Tinder with the data, stitch it together, pressure test it. But what you're trying to do is connect the dots, right? Don't duplicate something that you have, or pay for something twice. But at the same time, kind of crowdsource the resources, whether that's internally or also talking with external ones. But that Tinder example has, obviously we're on talking about it here today, but also sharing that with other share groups and, and internally at companies, it makes people realize, okay, I get it. You can't have just one right now because they're not perfect, but I don't want too many that we're playing Tinder with the data.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it around the consistency piece, right? Because with as many as there are out there, you can get any of them to tell the story that you'd like to tell. And I think a lot of it is, when you have reporting up to executive teams, being realistic with the data and what's out there. If you have all those options, you can't be just, picking the one that meets the story for the, period or the quarter, right? That's
exactly. And especially when you're thinking about, your executive team, whether it's a C-suite or a board, visualization is important, right? Or how you're like where the data is coming from. You don't want to have to explain that every time, like every quarter or however often you're getting in there to talk. You don't want to say, well, today it's this one, or next, in the next month it's a different one, because now, you're causing maybe confusion, or why are we switching, right? But again, it's that balance. You don't want to be like the last one to switch from maybe one that has lost their way, or with all the M&A, like maybe a different provider has combined and now that's a better option. But then you have that conversation, right? Why you made the change, or why we're using these, 2 or 3, let's say, to pressure test each other. But you if you're not consistent, then they're going to wonder, okay, well, which data source am I seeing this quarter?
right. And there's already, with executive teams and a lot of leadership teams out there, the skepticism around, digital as a whole, right? Have they grown up in a brick and mortar world? But it's not to say that they, they don't like digital. It's just something new, right? And I know just, in the past, there's a little bit of skepticism on the whole thing. And what is that share, right? Because it's easy to know the share of shelf when you're there and you have a shelf presence. But in the digital space, it's completely different. Right. And they're looking for trends over and over again. And I don't know, it just seems like a lot of times we have, that story that we have to tell, and we're trying to balance the reality with, trying to fit, like, what are the overall goals of the organization? What do they need to know? Is there any thoughts on how, you take a look at explaining the data?
Right. Yeah, I think because there's a lot of different things within that. You mentioned kind of digital shelf and other things, but we're looking at like e-com sales and share. I think because there's so many options and things are changing so fast, and that's a big, that's a key part of all this when talking digital. But it's really like having whatever works for you and your leadership team, but some kind of framework. Or you think about like a credit score. So as different options come in or change, how do you evaluate them, right? And that should stay consistent for the most part, unless there's a dramatic change in the industry, so that you can take a look at either a new data provider options, or if a SaaS, whether it's a SaaS partner or even a retailer, because you really have to, think about like the concept. You have to, look deeper than the dashboard. What are these numbers telling us, right? And that kind of goes from that. There's importance in storytelling, but what is the data? Where is it coming from? So, different levels, maybe you think about is like, okay, well, what's the source? Is it EPOS, where we all want to be, but there's not a lot of it, right? Or at least not a lot of it available. So then what is the quality, whether it's panel data or receipt data, or is it, survey based where people are being asked questions? So what does that look like, right? And that's a key one is, okay, what is the source? And then you can say, well, this is the biggest panel we've had, or this is the smallest, or in between. It's also then thinking about, well, how frequently do we get this, right? Are we getting this once a year, and we have to base, everything for the next year on this one? Is that going to be as timely as we need? or is it a daily update, right? Something that is pullable on a dashboard. I think you also have to show them is like, okay, are the categories, depending on your company, are they matching from the data source of how you look at it? Otherwise, there can be a lot of noise in there, right? Like for us with, let's say, Hills being dog and cat food focused, well, we don't want all, like reptile or other kind of fish, aquatic, all that kind of data in there, right? So, that's just one example. And then I think the other thing is, how deep is the data in terms of, well, is this SKU level? Is this brand level? Is this maybe just by banners or retailers? Or is it just by country? And that matters because now if you're, let's say, just a food brand, but you have only country data that includes electronics and apparel, well, you have to call that out, right? Like how much, what is in there and what's not in there, so that people can evaluate this. But I think end of the day, you got to make the complex simple. And and we're just talking e-com sales and share data, right? There's other parts of this, but how do you make sure that people understand, here's the data source, we put it through the evaluation, and there's other categories you can look at as well, but almost have like a red, yellow, green type format or some kind of score so that you can say, here's how much or not how much we should rely on this data. Is this directional, or is this something we can share external or with multiple teams?
Yeah. What do you think there isn't a more holistic solution out there, with all the AI that's come on the scene? It seems like there would be something that I know nothing's going to get to 100%, but maybe something can get to 90 or 95%. Is it just too complicated?
It's a combination of too complicated, and the complication comes into really modalities, right? Like, how are you making sure, let's say, just say Instacart, how do you know the data is being the ones from the consumers that bought on a screen versus the ones on a shelf because it came out of a physical store? So is it in there, or is it in there twice, or not in there at all? Right. So you have that, or click and collect, right? Let's say go into a Target, and how are they measuring? Is that data all in the store? It's coming from the store shelf, but how is it given to you? So that's one part of the complexity, let alone trying to look at this, let's say, from a global level too, right? But then the other part is availability, and how high are the walled gardens? Who's providing it? And that can be one where you're like, okay, we have this percent of our sales, but we're missing this key retailer, right? And then you have to decide. And again, this is why it's helpful to have a framework or kind of a scorecard or a scoring system where you can say, this is acceptable or not to look at this. But I think it's going to be interesting. Do the per se, and not like from marketing data, like from targeting, just again keep it sales and share perspective. Do the walled gardens in that respect get higher because everyone knows how important that data is, or does someone figure out an incentivizing plan or a way to really look at this that you could go to a brand or a set of brands and say, hey, we can truly help you understand, are you outperforming your competition? Are you on pace for your goals, whether it's sales growth or whether it's share? But we didn't even talk about social commerce, like how much is going through there and how hard that is to track, right? I mean, that makes the Instacart example look easy. So I don't think this gets easier anytime soon, which is why you have to stitch it together. But you just really have to, keep an open mind and watch the headlines, who's merging with who's partnering, listen to different share groups and see what's out there so you can constantly evaluate, but have that, scorecard, that kind of scoring system as your foundation.
Yeah, that's why I kind of wanted to dive into it, because I think, people are trying to oversimplify this, and you can't oversimplify something that's this complex. And they're looking for that, silver bullet that's going to, just answer all of these. And the reality is kind of what you've outlined is it is so complex. And while the data is there, it's not always readily available, right? I think a lot of retailers want to monetize that in some way, shape, or form, right? Which is
absolutely
in the data and the conversion. Then how are you going to, you're losing share on the digital shelf, right? To your competitors. hey, you unlock this, you can do paid media or whatever, and we're going to give you the next level of access to this data to see if you're winning or losing, because people really want to know. And yet today they can't really see it, as a whole. Like most platforms don't want to share it right now.
They don't, but that's where you, like, as an e-com leader or digital leader and analytics, right? This crosses over so many different departments, but one, you have to have different ways to communicate, right, with people, and using analogies sometimes help to try to help this, right? Like connect it to what they do know, whatever department they're in, or whether it's to a brick and mortar example. But I have found the same message has to be verbally talked about in large groups, and then I call it like subcommittee groups, right? The smaller groups or one-on-ones. It has to be written, and it has to be written in long form, but also for the TLDR crowd, right? Too long didn't read. So you have to have the quick summary. And you have to, connect that unknown to the known, again, through analogies. And end of the day, you just have to be repetitive, right? And you have to be okay with that. But yes, you can't, yes, you make the complex simple, but it's not a simple thing to do per se. But, the more you can build advocates, having different ways of communicating with your internal teams, then they can help amplify your message, right? And try and get this ball rolling. But there's people out there that are reward based, so they are more going to be excited for the opportunity, the potential. But then others are like, I want none of that. They're more risk motivated, right? And it's like, if we don't do this, this is the cost of doing nothing. But in a large group, that you could have both the risk and reward crowd in the same one. So how do you balance that? But I think it's so much about tailoring your message to same concept, right? You're not telling different stories necessarily. It's just how you tell the story is so critical.
Yeah, it's just so difficult. I mean, you think across the digital landscape, starting 3 years, even before COVID, but now just completely accelerated, how everything just on the sales side, the content and how much it's changed and what's needed. If you think about the marketing side and all the different avenues, everybody looking for a multi-touch attribution tool, that's not out there. I mean, that's $1 billion business plan. If you can come up with a multi-touch attribution tool, that from a direct to consumer side and all the different touch points. But third-party cookies going away, iOS updates coming through. Like the marketing side got incredibly difficult. And now we're getting into data and analytics, where you have the walled gardens really, protecting the data. But it's just gotten incredibly, you think about the old days where it's like IRI data, right? And it's so easy to sync up and it's all in store and it's fantastic, right? You can get that trend if everybody's leaning on it. But in this digital space, is there any, advice you have for people in the space?
I mean, as best you can. Overall, I would just say, like, within organizations, right? You really, the line I like is, internally, you have to define and align, right? And because all these different things are difficult, and people are at different levels of their digital journey or how much they're paying attention to it, right? Are they listening to the podcast or not? Things like that. And, listen, I've been lucky enough and am right now working with really talented teammates across all different departments, as you mentioned, but also supply chain, finance, legal, customer service, consumer affairs, all these. So that define and align is really critical. And then you think about it from, if you're in an organization that has a global team versus, let's say, the local teams, well, there's different motivations there per se, like how looking at data, like a local team is going to want to be way more SKU focused, right? And what are the particular brands, if you're looking at it from a share perspective, where a global team may be more looking at this from, comparing different geographies and different markets. So it's going to be a little bit higher up, but all, kind of, on the same song page, but singing, different variations of the tune per se. I just think, you have to define also, when you define a line, what are the potential pitfalls, right? And so, the tough ones we've kind of talked about a little bit, last milers, maybe, that kind of Instacart example, or even how you define D2C, What, if you're talking China with private traffic, or if you're talking US. So how does that look like? But I think if you can get across in your organization that this is a team sport, right? This is like American football. It's not like an individual sport like golf. That kind of helps connect the dots here, right? Even with everyone with different bonus structures, different KPIs, looking at it from a marketing lens or a sales lens, the consumer, I think this is a great acronym. It's not mine, but Terry Joyner's, who's out there on LinkedIn putting great content. But I saw him put it out there. It was SAFA, SAFA. The consumer starts anywhere, finishes anywhere, and it's kind of like how you have to think about it. So that can help with all these different things. Like, hey, the consumer it's not linear. It's not a traditional funnel anymore. How do we all work together? Because if we're not like internally or at your organization, if you're not like, collectively compromising internally, meaning that not everyone wins everything or loses everything, right? But if you're not collectively compromising internally, how can you compete externally in a more effective way? And why is that important? Well, it's so fast. You have to like the high quality decisions and adjustments you need to make. You can't be having too many meetings or too many unproductive conversations, kind of being in different silos. So teamwork and being connected are so important. You see different accounts. It varies even within, retailers, but some are now asking, hey, brands, come to us with a holistic plan. So the data is going to be the key to all of this. And how do you make sense of it and make sure the right data is getting to the right people, but not just in a silo? How does it connect to other teams as well? I just think like you just have to think about that sports analogy, or if that works for people, right? But this is football. Everyone plays a part, but we all have to be going the same direction. This isn't golf.
No, I agree, and it is interesting right now where you've got the retailers. They're asking the brands to come with a holistic plan for a couple of reasons. Number one, they want that holistic view and they want that commitment. But number two, they're also always looking for what's working at other retailers as well. It's kind of that like, look and find type thing. Say, hey, come to us with a holistic plan. Oh, what did you mean by bullet point 3? Right. And, it's transferring knowledge, and a plan from one retailer to another. So it's interesting how they're trying to pull those threads because they do want to grow. But the retailers are siloed from each other. Right. And so they're trying to learn from each other, but they can't ask directly. So they ask indirectly through brands. I've just heard that over and over again.
Yeah. But that's like to that point, whether you're a retailer or a brand though, right? Like you have to plan for pivots, not perfection. I think, I've used an analogy of, a lot of, whatever the topic may be, retail media is always a popular one with this, but it's a jungle out there, right? But if you wait to figure out, it's like an unmapped jungle, but if you wait to figure out how to get through it, well, you'll never go in, right? You're never going to have the perfect answer. So, there is this progress over perfection, but you need like the best jungle guides to get you through, right? That can kind of figure out as you go, have enough base knowledge, but also are, very curious, have a growth mindset. So I think, you asked about kind of advice. I think as you evaluate partners for yourself, from a data standpoint, you have to ask the questions and just kind of see, okay, how are they looking at this? Are they both focused on the now, but also, looking ahead and anticipating? Did they learn from mistakes, which are okay? If someone says they're doing it perfect, they're lying. Right? It's everyone. Are they learning from the mistakes fast? But I think you just have to pick those partners that can help navigate that jungle, whatever it may be, versus waiting for the perfect one to come along.
No, I agree. That's exactly it. The only wrong thing to do is to do nothing.
Yes.
Right. It's the only wrong thing to do. And there is and to highlight, there's none of the data providers out there. And I've talked to, 10 of them. There seemed that for a time there, it seemed like a new one was launching, every month, and they all could work. There's obviously ones that are more recommended than others from brands, but the reality is just getting started with one, right? And then it is step one, right? It's not that difficult. Choose one. In that case, might not, like it might not be the absolute best, but it's better than doing nothing. And that kind of that mindset of better, not best to get going is top of mind for me.
Absolutely. And again, going back to that kind of like framework, right? That scoring system. I mean, that way you can evaluate, current partners as well as the market changes or other ones come along. And yeah, it's a balance. Some you may want to go with established, or maybe you see one that's an up and comer that's worth jumping into, like a penny stock per se, right? So I just think you have to ask the right questions though too. And that's why I like that deeper than a dashboard, perspective. What are the size of your panels if it's that, or how many receipts? When you do get read or brand data, how close was it, right, to what your projections were? Questions like this that can help better, really see, okay, how good is this data? How close was it? Is this something that can help? And then don't get complacent, right? Can continuously try to improve and figure out, okay, do we have the best option here? So yeah.
No, I love it. So number one, take a look at a bunch of them that are out there. Number two, ask the right questions during the evaluation process. Number three, just pick one, right? Number four, that the standpoint of always be evaluating them. I mean, they in most cases, these service providers, they want the active feedback. They want to know the new things that you're looking for. I would say, number five, as I'm thinking about key takeaways, is have that red, yellow, green, right? As you're using that tool to monitor what's going on with your products as a whole. I think number six is just being able to communicate, getting the right data out there to communicate upwards, right? And I would say another one, maybe number seven, is being consistent, even if you have more than one, right? Don't get to the point where you've got 20 of these things and you're playing Tinder with them, but go to your core set if you can afford more than one is one of the key things.
Yeah.
And then just staying consistent in the story that you're telling. So you're not having to re-explain how you got the data every single time. I think that devalues a story that you're trying to tell.
No, I agree. And yeah, pick one, but pressure test as you can, right? Depending on funding or whatever. But, and sometimes that can even be for free or different ways. But yeah, just make sure you can pressure test these because, again, none of them are perfect, right? But I think like the all-encompassing one, right, is the teamwork. Like this all has to work together. And there's, talked about analogies earlier. They're like, if you think about racing, right, like car racing, IndyCar racing, and compare it to e-commerce data, there's a lot of similarities in the analogy, right? Before the race, you come in prepared, as much data as you can on your past performance or anticipated outcomes. You get to the race, it starts, and you realize, oh man, not everything is going the way we thought it would, right? According to the plan, because of competitors, track conditions, driver performance. You can figure out all those kind of connections there. So then you start crunching the numbers, and this is all different teams. You're talking to your driver, you're monitoring competitive activity, but you all want to win the race. You just have different ways of thinking about how to do it. But then you understand, oh crap, I got to make multiple pivots here in this plan. So those are your pit stops, and every team's going to be making pit stops. So it's going to change as you go. But your team, your pit crew of multiple departments all have to be aligned on their defined roles, but not too rigid that you can't change ever. But you have to do so in an extremely fast manner. If you don't do that pit change or that pit to stop fast, you're done. And this is all while others are all around you in a chaotic environment. I mean, I think if you could kind of think, just in that quick, 30-second analogy, there's so much there that demonstrates we all may be coming from different departments, sales, marketing, whatever it may be, but we have to work together. We have to use data. We have to talk to consumers and our teams. And we have to figure this out faster than our competition. I mean, that's what this is all about, right? The more competition outside, not inside the walls of the organization.
Yeah, I love it. I think this the title for this podcast episode as well. The confluence of Tinder, racing, and e-commerce sales and share data. It's a long way. No, it's a fantastic analogy, though. What are you the most excited about over the next, 6 months or a year?
I just like learning and thinking, looking at different things. And I think this now in the environment we're unfortunately probably going in with tough economic times, right? And if you think about that and listen, there's a lot bigger reasons and things to think about what's going on with the economy and different things in people's lives. But if you think about just from an e-com standpoint, this is now kind of going retro a little bit before COVID. You may have to, get a little bit better at your business cases to secure funding, right? Internally. You may have to get sharper with your plans and or maybe even with your resources. You may have to convince internally more than you've had to the last couple of years. I'm not saying it's right. It's just, this is an omni environment, right? And I think the really good e-com leaders will figure this out, but also stress this should not be like brick and mortar or online. This is an and proposition, right? Again, going back to that SAFA. And I'm really excited to see like who is going to figure that out the best, right? And really connect teams and really build the teamwork and knock down the silos in their organizations so that you can best satisfy, people, or AKA the consumer, right? So I'm most excited about how this journey continues, because I think some really creative things can happen in down economies, right? There's enough proof of that in a lot of different industries. People want convenience. So a lot of the muscle during COVID of going online and ordering things for a lot of consumers has been built, but now it's a matter of how do we connect that convenience? How do we connect an in-store experience to online and make sure it's both, being where the consumer is? I think the digital shelf, which probably could have a whole nother podcast on, is a great way of doing a lot of this connecting. But I'm really excited. I think we're still a little bit in the flip phone phase of how that consumer experience is when you're truly thinking omni-channel.
No, that's awesome. And I agree. I think the companies that are going to win are the ones that are the most open to testing and learning, and crunching the data and doing it as fast as possible, and not worrying about a failed experiment here or there. You think about an R&D aspect of e-commerce as a whole. I believe every company should have a massive R&D budget for e-com, for testing and learning so, my background is a chemist. I had tons of, most of the reactions I did failed. But I learned something in every one. And if you, even in those, what I'd say, those failures is an event, not a person, not a team, that, those that can test and learn faster than anybody else are going to get to the end faster than anybody else. And so, I want to say, Todd, thanks for your time today. Thanks for being such a great friend and supporter of the network as a whole. Really value you. I'd encourage anybody, reach out to Todd on LinkedIn. He just posts some great stuff there as a whole. And he's a very, very valuable resource. So thanks again, Todd, for your time today. And I think I will take you up on the offer of a follow-up episode on the digital shelf. we can dive into that for sure. But with that, I think we're going to wrap up this episode. And, thanks everybody for joining us. Join us for the next podcast for sure. Just really look forward to continuing our digital journey together. Everybody take care, stay safe, and we'll have you on a future episode. Thanks so much.